Well, again, let's get started here. I want to welcome everybody to our first installment of the California International Marathon, CIM University. This is kicking off our road to CIM, so welcome. My name is Scott Abbott. I'm the Executive Director of the Sacramento Running Association. We are the organization that puts on the California International Marathon, which is why we're all here this evening for that event that, even though it seems far off in December, really the work begins now, and that's why we're here. We've been putting on this event in Sacramento for 39 years, and in that time, CIM has become recognized as a premier running event, one of the best in the world, one of the best marathons in the United States. And that reputation, it's a special event, and that reputation's really been built on that it's a quality participant running experience. And people come from all over the world to run this race because they know it's an opportunity and there's resources available for them to be very, very successful and achieve their goal if they put in the work. And really, our organization, all of our stakeholders, all of our partners work very, very hard to make sure that CIM truly is a platform for achievement, no matter what that goal is, whether you're trying to run your first marathon, whether you're trying to just improve and run your fastest marathon, or whether you have elite goals to try to run a Boston qualifying time, or maybe even qualify for the Olympics. CIM really is that every man, woman, all persons race, and provides that great platform for achievement. And one of the ways we are able to really make that platform for achievement work is we work hard to support every runner, not just on race day, not just throughout race weekend, but also in the entire preparation and build up so that you can be most successful on race day. And that kind of brings us to CIM University. It's a big part of that road to CIM, that support that we provide. We're going to do 4 CIM universities throughout the fall to really kind of carry you through that training cycle, provide you important info and tips to not only help with your preparation leading into race weekend, but again, your approach on race weekend and race day so that you can have the most successful experience at CIM. And this is the first edition, and this one is titled Best Practices for Marathon Training. Tonight, we're going to examine all the components and ingredients that go into a proper marathon training plan that'll help you. I know everyone right now is just starting that process, and it can be daunting looking at 15, 16, 17 weeks, and you can go in a variety of different directions. And we're hoping tonight that we can kind of help put some framework and some guidelines to help you kind of have bumper rails on that road to CIM. We've got a great panel of coaches, very experienced panel of coaches that are going to be able to help you in this conversation tonight and keep you on track and get you on the right track heading into your training. I'm going to introduce those coaches to you and allow them to introduce themselves. First, I'd like to start with Sean Garbutt. He's the director of our official CIM training program. He's done that for a number of years. Very experienced coach. Sean, welcome to the panel.
All right. Thank you, Scott. And thank you all for joining us this evening. As Scott said, my role is to organize the official training program for the California International Marathon. This is the 5th year that I've been involved with this official training program. And in that time, we have got probably a couple thousand runners from start to finish of the start of the training program, finish line of CIM. So we really know what we're doing here in this program, and we're really excited to share some of that advice with you tonight. My experience coaching runners, I've coached runners from absolute beginners all the way up to folks who are kind of in that Boston qualifier pace range as well. So, and everyone in between. So tonight we'll try to provide some advice that's related to all of those different subsets of runners, and hopefully this will be useful to all of you.
Thank you, Sean. I'd like to introduce another one of our coaches in our official training program, Traci. Seto. She's an experienced runner, run a number of CIMs, coached a lot of great runners, including herself to a Boston qualifier running the Boston Marathon. I'd like to introduce Traci. Welcome to the panel.
Thank you, Scott. I'm really happy to be here, and I love coaching for CIM. It's one of my favorite training programs to coach. This is my 4th year coaching it through Fleet Feet, and I coach at the Elk Grove location. And it's just rewarding for me to bring you from the start to the of training to the starting line at the race. It's a great race. Love that race. It's a great place to get a PR and a Boston qualifier if that's what you're shooting for. And it's a great place to get your first marathon finish if that's what you're going for. I've coached for Fleet Feet Elk Grove since they opened. I also have coached middle and high school for a lot of years, about 17, 18 now. And I coach triathlons because that's my other passion. So it's great to be back coaching another round of CIM training.
Thank you, Traci. And then our third and final panelist is Briana Villapudua, also one of our coaches. She actually works with a lot of our online, in our online program, in the official training program. She helps a lot of all different levels, but particularly a lot of beginners. So for those of you guys out there looking to run your first time, Briana is going to be a great resource for you. Welcome, Briana.
Thank you, Scott. It's great to meet you guys. I've also been with the training programs for a few years now. I actually started in the training programs as a trainee like you guys, and I loved the process to start to finish of finding that commitment and that enjoyment of getting our feet on the ground and exploring that marathon distance. I'm a little bit more focused in the ultra marathon realm now. So after you guys complete CIM, that's what you guys can look for as well. But I'm glad to see you guys out there, and you guys are going to really enjoy the process. I would say that my biggest advice is to make sure that you enjoy each day, because if you cross that line and you're not smiling, then it's not worth it to me. But great to meet you guys.
Thanks, Briana. You just freaked a bunch of first timers out already talking about an ultra marathon. Let's just right now focus on 26.2, which is what we're going to do. Before we dive into the conversation, I want to give some quick kind of just ground rules. Obviously, we're doing this over Zoom. That's probably one of the few gifts that COVID gave us, and we used to do these in person, but doing this over Zoom has really created a lot more access to this great resource and brought a lot more voices in. And so we're hoping it could be a great conversation. We will provide time. We want this to be as interactive as possible. We will provide time at the end for questions. There's a couple different ways you can ask questions. You can either use the raise hand function and we can call on you, or you can type questions directly into the chat and we will answer those. If they're quick and easy, we might just answer them right in the chat, or I'll throw it out to the panel. And then the other thing is we are recording this and we're going to post it on our YouTube channel and also on our website. So if you're watching this after the fact and you want to put, and you've got some questions, you can put it right in the comments of the video and we'll dive back in and we'll answer some of those questions. So that's kind of what we've got. We kind of ask that everybody stays on mute unless we unmute you for a question. That just allows this to operate smoothly. So again, thank you guys for joining us. We're going to kind of get started here. Again, my name is Scott Abbott. Just a little bit about my background as part of this panel too. I've been the executive director, as I said, for Sacramento Running Association and the California International Marathon for 7 years now. I also have over 20 years experience working with distance runners, coaching distance runners of all abilities, from youth all the way up to professional distance runners and everybody in between. So I'm super excited to be on this journey with another cohort of runners here for what we expect to be another great CIM in 2022. All right, so let's dive in here. I really want to start really generally and then kind of work more specific, but I want to really start with you, Sean, and really talk about the importance of having a plan and that's systematic and structured. Everyone's facing this kind of, as I said, this daunting, 17, 18 weeks in front of them, and this big, goal of, either trying to run a marathon for the first time or run fastest they've ever run. You talk about the role that the plan itself plays and having a plan in that journey.
Sure, yeah. I think there are a few really important reasons why having a plan from the get-go is important. I think the number one thing is just physical preparation, right? So we know that 26.2 miles is a long way to run, and we know that it'll be challenging for any of us, regardless of our level. So having a plan will assure that you're physically prepared to take on the race. that you can avoid injury during the race, and that you can achieve whatever goal you've set for yourself. It provides structure, and it allows you to break up your preparation into achievable chunks along the way. I think also, running a marathon can sometimes be intimidating. So having a plan allows you to focus on the day-to-day, your daily assignment, rather than thinking, always about this huge task of 26.2 miles. Instead, you can break it into these small, achievable assignments on a daily basis as you move through, if you start this week, that's 16 weeks of preparation for the race. And then I think it also helps you, consider your goals and consider what running a marathon means to you. And when you're creating your plan should really, reflect that, whether it's to finish the marathon, or if you have a goal time in place, or if you just want to have a better experience than you had the last time you ran a marathon, whatever that is, if you can structure your plan in a way that really emphasizes that goal, the whole training process and your race day experience will be so much more meaningful.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, Sean. I just think that having that plan really provides you that structure and kind of gives you that recipe to follow. Traci, maybe you could talk a little bit about kind of how that plan kind of dovetails into this concept of kind of consistency and frequency of training and the progression that kind of comes along with that over the training process.
Yeah, I can. I also want to add on a little to what Coach Sean said. And when I have a training plan, and when you have a training plan in place, it takes a little bit of the burden off of you as well, because you don't have to stress over, what am I going to do? Am I doing enough? Am I not doing enough? You have a plan in place, and you can just focus on your workouts. And then for me, one of the biggest things is the consistency piece. Having a plan that will take me through my days of the week and will take me through my easy workouts, my intervals and harder workouts, my long run. Having a consistent program in place that will gradually build me so that I am not doing too much as I grow from week to week is so important, because we tend to, when we feel better, we want to add a little more on, and when we don't feel as good, so yes, you have to listen to your body, but when you're feeling good, we don't want you to overdo it and add more on. Stick to the training plan, and it will prove over the course of the training that you will be able to get you to that start line at CIM. It's a very, very good, well thought out and well executed plan that we've been using.
Yeah, and I would actually just follow up right with you there, Traci, maybe even dive in a little more specifics, like that theory of progression, like what is kind of that proper progression? How is that plan built to progress everybody to the goals of completing a marathon or completing it in a time that they're shooting for?
One of the concepts of our plan this season is that we're kind of doing it in terms of increasing when it comes to the long run. We're increasing the long run, but not every week. We're going to take 2 weeks where you're running at that same distance. So you've increased your distance on the long run, and the following week you're going to run that same distance so you can feel a little stronger at that distance before you step up to the next level. So that's one of the components that helps with the progression piece. Another is not to add too much volume as we go week to week. It's planned out so that we're adding just enough volume. You don't want to add a lot of volume and a lot of intensity both in the same week. So you have to really have that balance of whether you're adding volume or adding intensity level.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. And I know that not everybody here is in the official training program, and so I know that you're referencing a plan that you guys are utilizing as coaches. But again, to echo Sean's point, even if you're not in the official training program, following a plan of some sort is always going to be important, and almost every good plan will follow that progression that Traci is talking about. And I think another important point that you guys touched on was this idea of consistency and really, kind of day over day, kind of a water on stone approach, getting to that result. I don't think any one single run or any one single workout matters all that much as it is the totality of executing this entire plan. And I think that's important for people to focus on. Sometimes we get so hyper focused on the plan itself, and it says, hey, today I've got to do this. but really what it is 17 weeks of a lot of work. And that's the most important part of it, is that consistent work over a long period of time rather than hyper focused on any one day, one workout, one long run. So as long as you're consistent in following that theory of progression, you're going to be kind of in a good spot. So, hey, Briana, I actually want to maybe touch on a little bit for you, if you could speak a little bit about kind of this theory of adaptation, maybe some of the newbies right now. And again, I want to welcome all the new people. Welcome to Crazy Town. It may seem like a daunting thing right now, but I'm sure Briana is going to be able to speak to this. You will get there, especially if you're on this call, you're serious about what you're doing. If you're serious about your preparation, you can do it. And Briana, I'd like you to kind of speak to that. I'm sure there's people that are on this Zoom right now that are like just starting, or like, hey, 3, 4, 5 miles is a challenge for me. How is 26 going to happen? Maybe you could talk about how adaptation and how that plays a role in the training process. I think I got to unmute you. All right.
Hi, thank you. Adaptation is extremely important, and I know it's very hard to kind of sign up for something that seems intimidating for most people, but I think signing up is probably the hardest part. Once you find that framework of a training program that kind of consists of like the 4 basic workouts that you're going to be doing each week, which are those easy runs, a speed workout, cross training, and your long runs. Those 4 fundamentals there to your training programs, depending if you use ours or another's, is really what's going to allow your body and your mind to adapt on what your schedule is. And for all my newbies out there, and I think for us that have, traveled the 26.2 miles before, we all know that you're going to get there. So don't worry about that too much. But most importantly is to take each day at a time. I know most of us are thinking about our long run on the weekend, right? We have 12 miles, we have 8 miles, we have 3 miles, and we start to kind of get a little overwhelmed by that mileage in our minds. And the biggest thing is to take it by each day. So today is Thursday, right? You had a 45-minute easy run, you had a 4-mile run. Go out there and take your time and really enjoy it. And when we say easy, or your training program says just getting time on your feet, then that's what's most important there for that day. So allow yourself to kind of feel that experience of each day's process to allow your mind and your physical body to adapt to that training as well.
That's really great advice. And I think we had Sean, you might remember, we had a coach a few years ago on the panel who used to say, don't even look at the plan down the road. Maybe look at it in the beginning just to see, hey, this is where I'm headed. But then after that, just cover it up and focus on the tasks in front of you. And as you guys progress, your body will adapt, and you're going to be amazed in 10, 12 weeks down the line where you're going out for a 14 or 16 mile run. And you're going to think like, hey, just a few weeks back, I was struggling through 6 miles and then 8 miles. But that's the magic of adaptation. It's really the best performance enhancing drug, natural performance enhancing drug that exists in our sport is adaptation. So I think that's really important. And if you follow those proper forms of progression, that's where that adaptation occurs. So I think that's really great advice, Briana. And now, I'd really kind of like to dive into, you guys have all touched a little bit on, kind of thrown it out there, the easy runs, the speed workouts, the long runs. Let's dump into those types of each types of those workouts and talk about the importance of each one. Let's start, Sean, with the long run. Obviously, I think that's the thing that everybody sees at kind of the end of their week. And we know that ultimately we're trying to achieve a long run of some form, in December. So the long run being an important component, I don't think anything is more important than others. That's my theory, but talk about the importance of the long run and how you guys use progression to help people get there through the long run.
Yeah, I think for most marathon training plans that you see out there, the long run is really the anchor of your weekly cycle. So most training plans that you'll follow, it's structured on a 7-day cycle, and usually towards the end of each week of your training, you have a long run, right? And it's literally as simple as that. It's a long distance run that's designed generally to improve the efficiency and the capabilities of your aerobic system, right? So the ability to cover a long distance with very low energy input. So high output, low input. And so, the other pieces of the plan, or the other types of training intensities, which we'll talk about in a moment, all feed into that ultimate goal of endurance, right? Covering the long distance without, a lot of exertion. So generally, your long run distance will progress gradually following that principle of adaptation, right? So, and maybe a skill-based activity like basketball, for example, if you want to get good at shooting, you would just take a lot of shots, right? But in running, it's a little more complex than that. So if you want to be able to run 26.2 miles, you're not just going to go out there and run, for hours and hours on end over and over again. You have to work yourself up to that point. So for most athletes, that means starting out with a shorter run. Your long run may be under 10 miles, might even be under 5 miles, depending on where you're starting at. And then gradually, as you're adapting, adding miles in a structured, purposeful way, so that you're achieving your ultimate longest distance of the training of your training plan. And there are many different ways that you can increase your long run distance. Some folks will increase their distance linearly, so you're adding maybe a mile or maybe 10, 15 minutes each week. Other plans, including the one that we use in the official training program, really follows kind of a stair-step protocol where you're adding mileage and then sort of dialing back and repeating that mileage before you add more. But the main principle is that you don't want to add too much too soon. And generally, you also want to keep your intensity more in that endurance range rather than running at a high intensity. So often you'll see long runs assigned at an easy or a conversational effort level. What that basically means is an effort level that you feel like you could run sort of indefinitely. And as you adapt, that the actual pace that you're running may get faster. But overall, generally for your long run, you want to be at kind of an endurance pace, something that a pace or an intensity that you could maintain for a long period of time. And then depending on your level and your goals, as you get closer to race day, you may add some specificity in your long run. You may run some of your miles at your goal marathon pace to practice the pace that you need to run on race day to achieve whatever your eventual finish time goal is. So there's many different principles, but generally adding mileage in a structured and gradual manner, and then keeping your intensity purposely in that endurance zone, not at a high intensity level.
Yeah, that's a lot of great information. You pretty much encapsulated all of the, how the long run works and how important it is. But maybe Traci touched a little bit. He talked about the intensity a little bit, but I do know, especially people that are performance oriented, that the question comes up a lot about pace on long runs. Are you out there just trying to log time on your feet? What are you trying to focus on when you're actually executing a long run? Obviously, the goal is to progress from week to week, but within each one long run, what is it that you're trying to execute?
So throughout the progression of long run, you're trying to increase your body's ability to maintain and handle that level of endurance for a period of time. So when we talk about pacing for the long run, it's very different than many of our other workouts. We're going to focus on keeping an easy pace. You can even have conversation while you're maintaining that pace. We will have weeks that we recommend that as you get more comfortable with the longer distances, that you start to incorporate some of your goal marathon times with pacing times within your long runs. So gradually building that up so your body is used to maintaining that goal marathon pace while you're also building up your endurance in your long runs.
Yeah, that's great. Now, is it about running for time, running for distance? I know there's that focus on trying to get to 26 miles or up to whatever in the long runs, 18, 20. The number matters to some people, but how do you guys fall on the time versus distance thing? Especially if you're maybe running, as you talked about, Traci, slower pace. If you're on a difficult terrain on your long runs, it's going to be a lot slower. You might be out there longer than you would be even in some of your later long runs, maybe as long as you might even be on race day for that matter. So where does kind of time versus distance fit in? Anybody can pick that one up.
I can take that one. And then if you guys want to add on, I think when we think about the full training cycle, we're thinking about moving from a place of sort of general base building to more specificity, right? So in these initial weeks of your marathon training, it's okay to run your long run on duration, right? So the amount of time that you're out there, because really what we're doing is just adapting your aerobic system for, a long period of that endurance intensity level. However, as you get closer to race day, it is important to know, to kind of match the terrain and the pace that you'll be running at the marathon, right? So, if you live in a place where there are a lot of hills and you're constantly running uphill, that will be good in terms of just time on your feet and time, stimulating adaptation for your aerobic zone in that initial phase of your training. But as you get closer, maybe within that kind of 8-week period of race day, it's really important for you to find terrain that matches, the rolling downhill terrain that we have at CIM, and really practice the pace that you will actually be running on race day. Your neuromuscular system needs to adapt as well. And so those movements that you will be performing to run that pace on that type of terrain also need to be trained. So add specificity as you approach race day, and consider moving to a more mileage-based training protocol as you get closer to race day.
Briana, maybe speak a little bit about for slower or new runners as they're approaching these longer distances on long runs, how they can kind of build in like potentially walking or balancing kind of the run walk. Yeah.
I got muted again, sorry. Absolutely. I think interval training is extremely important for our run walkers to kind of get that adaptation of kind of progressively getting into that run over a period of time. When thinking about doing your long run for kind of that time or for that distance there, that kind of goes back to why it's so important to have a training program and outline so that you have something to kind of guide you on like what those runs should be and kind of that intensity, that increasement each week. And as well as making sure that you have some sort of like accountability for those miles as well. I think a lot of us, we go out there and we're running like 12 miles and we start to kind of, divert ourselves and like what it's going to feel like race day. But I think, going back to like what skills and like the practice of like getting that mileage in is most important. So if you are a run walker, having those intervals like a 2-minute on jog or run with a 45-second break and using that during that full 12 miles, 14 miles, 10 miles distance there, that's going to bring more progression into your run to allow your body kind of to adjust to that distance there as well.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point. I think ultimately, no matter what you're doing, if you're a run walker all the way up to, kind of the elite or faster runners that are really focusing on kind of the pace, like Sean said, as you get to the back end of your training cycle, it's about using the long runs to really kind of practice and execute plans, and that's going to get into, how you guys are fueling and hydrating and really using those long runs as really kind of practice grounds for your race day. Even the clothes you wear, it's starting to kind of think about the types of things. I know it's tough now to be wearing clothes you're going to want to wear in December, but as you get closer, those are the types of things you can really use long runs to kind of practice execution, whether it's a run walk plan, it's your fueling and hydration plan, whether it's a pacing plan, use those long runs as really practice grounds for that. I think that's a great point about the run walk. If all you're going to do is just walk when you're tired, well, I can tell you this, by the end of the marathon, all you're going to want to do is walk. So really having a plan and just trying to execute that plan all the way through will really kind of give you that focus. I think that's a really great point, Briana. Okay, now the magic question about the long run that comes up every time we have these conversations. If you're looking at your training plan, and some of the people in the training program or people that are looking at have other plans that they're following, are going to ask, hey, I see this progression that's working 8 to 10 to 12 to 14 to 16 to 18. And then all of a sudden, that's it. We stop at either 18, 19, 20 miles. That's the longest run we do. Some plans might go further and have you do maybe as much as 22. I've seen those. But, Sean, maybe you could kind of talk about why only 18 to 20 if the whole point is we're progressing. Maybe reduce some anxieties where people are wondering about that right now.
Yeah, sure. And I think to answer that, you really have to refer back to the science, right? So when if you're working with a coach or you're looking up a plan online, ideally that plan is informed by the best, studies on endurance that are available out there. And generally what we see is that you have diminishing returns in terms of that training stimulus that leads to adaptation after about 2.5 to 3 hours of running, right? So what that basically means is if you're out there for longer than 2.5, 3 hours, you're doing more harm than good to your body, and you're setting yourself that much more behind for the training that's to come in the days that follow. So if you're a faster runner, that means you can probably cover more miles within that time frame. But if you're in that kind of run walk category, or you're just on the slower end of the pace spectrum, that's totally fine. But in that case, we would probably cap you at maybe 18, 20 miles. And for some of you, maybe even shorter than that. And then for folks who are a little bit faster, depending on the training that you're bringing into your marathon training, it may be appropriate for you to run as much as 20, 22 miles, knowing that the duration of time that you're actually out there is less. But if you're coming in with a very deep fitness base, you may not even need to go as high as 20. And we know the more duration of time that you're spending in your training, the more risk you have of either spiking your fatigue or putting yourself at risk of injury. So we always want to balance those two factors. So my recommendation would be continue to tell yourself quality over quantity, and more is not always better, right? And really trusting the science on that, and remembering that running is not completely a skill-based activity. So going back to that basketball analogy earlier, getting shots up may help you with your basketball shot, but when we're training for running, we're really working on some of the physiological and neuromuscular adaptations that can only come from responsible dosage at each intensity. So just trust and know that with gradual progression, and then with that kind of 2.5, 3 hour rule, and really keeping your mileage below that like 20, 22 threshold, will provide enough training stimulus for your body to adapt and be capable of running that 26.2 mileage on race day, as long as it's in conjunction with the other training intensities that I'm sure we'll talk about in just a moment.
Yeah, I think that's great. Does anybody else have, Traci or Briana, have any, things to add about that question? It comes up quite a bit.
I just love hearing Sean describe all the science about it. He's amazing.
Sorry, I got the sun coming in my eyes here, so I'm sorry if I look a little washed out here. I got a window right here in front of me, but I just want to piggyback on that, Sean. I think you answered it really, really well, but I do know it comes up. But also I think a big part of it is it's important for us to remember that, running a marathon, the reason we're all here on this Zoom and the reason we're, we doing this, is that it is a big undertaking. There is a little bit of an unknown, and you really have to kind of commit to that in this journey, that's the magic of the marathon. That's why people put stickers on their car. That's why they bore all their friends and family at work and at home about their training. It's a big deal, and it's a lot of work, and part of it comes in that magic of those final few miles. That's the challenge. The goal of training is to kind of get you as efficient as you possibly can be through 18 to 20 miles, managing those very, very well through your pacing and through your preparation and your fueling. And then you get to those final 5 or 6 miles, and that's where the race begins. That's the challenge. And really, you can't really prepare for that and have that guarantee on race day. Briana, you talked about being an ultra marathoner. People who run 100-mile races, they don't go do 100-mile long runs, because to Sean's point, there's a lot of diminishing returns after you're out there for 15, 16 miles, 2 to 3 hours. And so the goal is to become as efficient as you can for those 2 to 3 hours. And then really that's where your fueling and your pacing and all the work that you've done kind of comes into play. So I think that's really important to remember. I've had so many friends or people I've coached who they'll tell me a couple weeks out from a marathon, like, yeah, I had this great long run. I ran, 24 miles at marathon and did all this at marathon pace, blah, blah, blah. And then I'm thinking in the back of my head, like, you just did your marathon right there. And then they struggle on race day because they really went to the well in training just so they could kind of, really have that guarantee of like, all right, I did it 24 miles, 25 miles, 26 miles. and then they really left their marathon out on their training day, and then race day didn't go real well for them because it requires so much recovery from those long runs. In fact, even that 20-mile long run will require a lot of recovery, and that's why we move into a taper right after that. So I think that's important to remember. I think there's a really good question about, for some of the slower runners and the run walkers, if we're talking about 2.5 and 3 hours being the law of diminishing returns, is it necessary for them to get all the way up to 20 miles or 18 miles, or should they be capping at 2.5 and 3 hours? Maybe Briana, can you take that?
Yeah, I could definitely add on to that spot. That was great. Thank you. Definitely one thing to consider too is like learning the ability to like tune in with your body out there. So I know a lot of us have the expectation that every single day we're going to go out there and we're going to feel great. But some days may not be like that depending on the weather, right? It's 104 out today. Here in Sacramento, California, it's a warm one. So going out there, running 5 miles in the heat, or if you're somewhere where it's starting, to get later into the year and it's a little bit colder in the, early mornings or the evenings, depending on where you are, our environment and kind of everything else that we have going on in life definitely plays a role in our training as well. So consider that too. And the reason why that's important is the mileage and how it feels is always going to feel different depending on those things and depending on the week. The first couple of weeks, you're getting kind of in tune with your scheduling, with your training there, getting the body acclimated to kind of what that scheduling is and that routine. And as you move further along and you become more adaptive to those long runs, to those speed workouts, to those easy runs there, you may be out there for 2.5, 3 hours. And let's say you get 12 miles done in that time. But the week after that, kind of how Scott's son experienced on race day, is that the next week you might be there for, an hour and a half, and then you get that 12 miles in, okay? So something to consider that each week is different there. And that's important because a lot of us, feel like we won't show up on race day feeling good. So keep that in mind. That's why we have these training runs, these long runs of practice, so that we can really dial in on what race day is going to look like, so that when you show up on race day, it's just like any long run as well.
That's great. Thank you. I know we've talked a lot about the long run and we know that's so important, but I do want to start to dive in a little bit to some of those, we've called them speed workouts or performance workouts that are kind of usually plugged in the middle of the week. Maybe Traci, maybe you could speak to kind of what are the point of those? Why do we do those? What benefit do they play? And also what types of workouts work best as for those quote unquote speed workouts or performance workouts?
So yeah, a lot of people are concerned, like, why do you speed workout? Because that's not how I'm going to be running a marathon. Why would I want to do something like that? And speeds have a place in every training program that you're going to do for every race level. The short, fast speed workouts that we do, and we'll touch on which kind of workouts we will be doing, or you should be doing, are designed to improve your running economy. You're trying to improve like the amount of oxygen that your body is able to is consuming at a given pace. So with better running economy, it's going to improve and allow your body to perform better because you've improved that and it's working more economically. It's also in simple terms, it's allowing you to run faster with less effort. Just to say it simply. So as you go through doing more speed work and get more economy in your running, now you can run that workout a little bit faster, and it doesn't feel like you've had to put in quite as much effort. That's one of the goals of doing those speed workouts. In a program, you're going to want to have different types of speed workouts. You want to have some intervals of varying lengths. So sometimes you want to have them be perhaps as short as a quarter mile and up to a mile in a speed workout. You should consider incorporating threshold level workouts where you're working on a tempo pace and building that tempo distance up as you're working through your program. And a nice way to have a tempo in there and build that up is to maybe have a broken tempo, have a tempo with a little bit of recovery in between, followed up by another tempo. And you're holding that threshold pace for some sustained period of time. And then a third way is to incorporate hill training into your workout. You can save a lot of stress on your body because you're able to work at a higher intensity without as much stress on your body by working on those hill repeats and working that way. So those are some ways you can get in speed workout. I hope that, everybody has some type of speed workout at least one time during the week within each of your training weeks.
Sean, maybe talk a little bit about the role that these speed workouts can play in kind of dialing in your paces. And should they just be going out in a speed workout and, hey, I'm just running as hard as I can for certain distances, or are you working off of a gold marathon pace? Like how do you kind of structure those workouts or execute those workouts, the different types of workouts?
Sure, yeah. I think generally when we talk about speed workouts, it's a general term, but we really kind of break it into different intensity levels depending on our goal, right? So at the beginning of your training cycle, in this kind of time frame right now, you might work on some shorter, much faster running, closer to your top speed, with the intention of really boosting your muscular endurance, so the strength of your body to perform the strong, powerful movements, really working on your running mechanics. So kind of an initial strengthening phase. The next phase you may consider running at a slightly slower but still much faster than your easy pace, and that phase, often you'll hear terms thrown around like VO2 max, that type of thing. Really what we're talking about is building a bigger engine, right? So we know, like, you put a bigger engine in a car, you're going to get more performance out of that car. And regardless of what your pace is, you can benefit from a bigger engine, right? So running close to the maximum amount of oxygen that your body is able to use for energy production will cause your body to adapt next time to be able to use even more oxygen. And that benefits your marathon running, because if your body is able to use more oxygen, it will use it whenever it's asked to, which can include that endurance pace. And then as you get much closer to race day, that's when you'll throw in some threshold running. When we talk about that, we really talk about the maximum pace that you're able to run or walk before your body switches over to a less efficient means of energy production, right? So that's really when we get into that specificity towards your marathon running, when we talk about, okay, how long can I go with this basically unending or sustainable energy production source. And then the other intensity level that can be involved in some of this speed work components is your goal marathon pace running. So for some of you, not all of you, but for some of you, especially if you're on the faster end of your pace, of the pace spectrum, your goal marathon pace will be significantly different than your easy pace. So it's important to practice that more intense pace, that faster pace, just to adapt your body to it. For those of you who are out there just with the goal to finish the race, your goal marathon pace may be the same as the pace, your easy pace, the pace that you're running during your long run. So in that case, your goal marathon pace, it may not be as important to practice that. But for faster runners, it may be just as important. And then all of those other training intensities I listed, those are important for everyone, because we're really talking about physiological adaptations that everyone can benefit from. So even if speed is not at the top of your priority list, you still can benefit from faster running, because it all contributes to your endurance on race day.
That's a great answer. You covered a lot of things that I was going to maybe throw to Briana, so that's great. And so maybe I'm going to drop to you, Briana, and kind of moving forward from speed workouts a little bit. And I just really want to touch on hills really quick, because you mentioned it, and they're great for training, especially early in the training cycle, because you can get your heart rate up without really having to run that hard, so you can get that intensity. But it's also important for those of you guys that are new to CIM and the CIM course. A lot of people are fooled by a CIM as a net downhill course, or it's known as a flat, fast course, because Sacramento is generally flat, but there are some fairly significant hills on the course. It's rolling hills that ultimately over 26 miles does net downhill, but that doesn't mean you aren't running uphill in the race. And so it is important for you to kind of build some of those hills into your training program so that you're prepared for those on the race course. And in our final CIM University, we'll dive a little bit more into the race itself and pacing and the race course. but I did want to let you guys know that as you kind of dovetail on that point about hills. As we move kind of from, we talked about long runs, we talked about kind of the speed workouts and the importance of those. What about everything in between? Briana, maybe you can start with that. I know you guys sometimes call them homework runs. It's kind of the mortar between the bricks, between those big kind of key things, the long run and those kind of speed workouts. You know, what is the goal or the importance of those kind of in between runs that you're executing throughout the week?
Thank you, Scott. Yeah, so during the week, most of your volume of training is going to be built on those kind of like homework runs is what we refer them to. So those are the runs that you're going easy, again, like conversational pace out there, you're taking your time. And usually it's no more, depending on what your goal is, more than 7 or 8 miles, usually less than that, depending on what your training program looks like. So as that is like your building base of the program there, right? That's where a majority of your volume should be. That's the time that you're really kind of building that strength before you start going towards those speed workouts and those long runs there, which is why we call them homework. It's kind of those runs, you know, on most days you probably don't want to go out there and run 4 or 5 miles, but those are the days that are going to be the most important to build your overall base of training there as well. And as Scott referred, usually the first, I think it's like 12 miles of CIM is rolling hills through Fair Oaks. So definitely getting those strength training is going to be fundamental there. So it won't be too much of a shocker when you start going downhill when you get to 22 miles CIM.
Yeah, thanks, Briana. And Sean, how many days is appropriate should you be running a week? You know, when you talk about these homework runs, and if people are saying, hey, I want to get a long run in, and they focus on that, and they got their speed workout, and they're like, well, what's the point of running the 2 to 3 miles or 4 to 5 miles or whatever it is in between? How many days a week, do you find optimal for that runners should be running?
Yeah, when we talk about those easy runs that are in between those quality sessions, the speed workout and the long run, really what we're building there is resilience, right? So we want your body to have this constant, training stimulus so that it is constantly in the mode of adaptation to everything that you're throwing at it. So, those runs, those easy pace runs that kind of fit in between, they're encouraging your body to recover. They're doing a lot of different things that will prepare you for those successive weeks of training. Generally, we prefer athletes are running maybe 5 days a week, ideally. If you're kind of in that more experienced group, probably 6 days is appropriate. And 4 days would be difficult, but doable depending on your background. And less than 4 days a week would probably put you at risk of injury and maybe failure on race day. So if you can shoot for about 5 days and then add on maybe a 6th day, if you feel like you're in that kind of more experienced zone, you're probably in good shape. And you want to periodize, on a weekly basis. You want to put those easy runs in between those quality sessions, right? So I like the analogy of the mortar between the bricks, right? So you wouldn't want to do your speed workout and your long run back to back. You need some space in between for your body to recover. So generally what that looks like is in the middle of the week at some point, your speed workout, sometime on the weekend, you have your long run, and then in between, you kind of drop in those easy days, shorter duration of time, shorter distance, but still getting out there in between those quality sessions.
So typically those easy runs are usually 3 to 4 days of if you're running, 5 to 6 days a week.
Yep. Yeah, and I want to echo that really less than 4 days becomes really tough. I mean, I always think of 4 days, you're at least running more than you're not. That's kind of an every other day thing. If you're trying to take on running a marathon, I know a lot of people are busy and they're trying to squeeze life in, but if you're running less than you're not, then, I think that 4 days is that bare minimum threshold. I think you're absolutely right that 5 is probably optimal. And again, it really provides that buffer. Otherwise, you're putting way too much strain on that long run. It's too much a high percentage of your weekly mileage. And if too much of that's coming in one run, as Sean said, you leave yourself up to injury or potentially a burnout and going to leave yourself really flat on race day. So those homework runs, those those mortar between the bricks are very important to kind of bridge the gap and provide support and really buttress those workouts in the long run. So that's really important. Yeah, go ahead.
We've touched a lot on the physiological benefits of it, but there's also a lot of mental benefits and psychological benefits you get from doing those day after day workouts and putting those in there. You're mentally preparing yourself through this whole cycle to get to the point where you can sustain that distance of a run, and you'll be surprised at how sticking to that consistency will improve that as well.
Yeah, I mean, we started with consistency, and really what these runs do is really, build that adaptation up and really kind of create that. When you start doing something every day, it becomes what right now might be a struggle, then it becomes a norm. I mean, you'll see in the taper, and I know all the coaches will probably chuckle at this. You'll have people when they actually start to taper and you're actually only asking them on their weekend to run maybe 8 or 10 miles. They actually have some anxiety, like, oh, I'm so used to running so much more, which is funny right now. People are, maybe struggling through 5, 6, 7 miles, and later they're going to be actually like clawing at the walls, to be running more than you're asking them to do during the taper. And really that's because you've built up that consistency and it becomes a part of, just kind of your norm, or your homeostasis for that matter. So I think that's a really good point. And also, I think one of the things going back to the speed workouts that's important is, I think, and also these easier runs in between, is this should also be fun and varying up what you're doing, running with friends, doing different types of workouts, adding some variety. It kind of diminishes kind of the drudgery of it and starts to build in a little bit of fun and enjoyment. You got different types of running that you're doing every day, and trying to do it with friends, trying to do it and really checking boxes on your training plan. It really can be motivating, rather than just kind of staring at this huge run on Sunday that you got to do or something like that. So I think that's important. I do want to leave some time for questions. I know we're kind of getting to the back end of things. You guys have been putting some great questions in the chat. We've been trying to touch on those. I want to jump into some of the questions you have. If you guys have questions, keep putting it in the chat. I think that's a really good way we can deal with that. One of the questions I just want to talk about really briefly, they asked about post-workout recovery, ice bath, massage, and then also about fueling. And I just want to touch on the fact that those will be things that we will talk about in future. Those specific topics will be in future CIM universities. We're going to have one just on injury prevention and recovery, but at the same time, you should be doing active. I know right now in your training, you should be doing things that are active for your recovery. We can I don't want to dive into the details of, massage or ice or stretching, but generally you should be focusing on recovery, both from a fueling and a body maintenance standpoint after your runs. And then there was a question about, practical tip for maintaining marathon pace after mile 22. Again, this is something we'll touch on in later universities, but really that comes down to two things: your fueling plan and your pacing plan. Those two things are really important. If you've done everything in training that you can do, you've executed all of your workouts, you've done your long runs, there's no real training piece that's going to help you in mile 23, 24, and 25. That's about how well you've executed on race day, your pacing and your fueling. If you've trained appropriately, fueling and pacing are the two things that can derail your marathon, are the only two things, honestly, that can derail your marathon. And so it's really important that you have a good fueling plan and a good pacing plan. And we'll talk about those at future ones. So I was just kind of burning through a couple of questions there. I'm trying to see if there's any other questions that you guys have. Any other kind of key points that you guys want to pepper in here as we're waiting for a few more questions to come in, coaches?
Yeah, sure. I think there's a few questions rolling in here in the chat, and we'll definitely get to those. And I will suggest the next couple CIM universities are super useful, especially for a lot of these questions about recovery and fueling and that type of thing. We'll touch on those very specifically. So Scott, should we
Yeah,
jump into some of these questions in the
well,
chat?
I think, like I said, we've been kind of going through these. I think we've hit most of them. But there is one right here, advice about determining target marathon race pace. The longest run I have run is a half, so I don't have a good idea what my pace should be. So based on a half or any other race distance, what's the best way to figure out goal marathon pace?
Yeah, that's a great question. And especially if you've never run a marathon before, right? Like it's very difficult to like project forward. My advice is if you have a recent race result where you felt like you really achieved close to your maximum potential. So for example, with that half marathon, you really felt like that was like the best half marathon that you've ever run, and you executed it well, and you were really happy with your finish time. You can plug that into a pace calculator. There are many different pace calculators available with just a simple quick Google search. Generally, they operate on some of the formulas developed by some of the science-based running coaches that are out there, the Jack Daniels formula, some others out there, and they can really help you calculate an equivalent performance to that recent race that you ran. So for example, you would plug in your half marathon time, it would project, okay, with the same level of fitness and marathon specific training, you would have been capable of this marathon time. And that can give you kind of a general idea of, what you can shoot for. So that would be my recommendation. Base your goal on a realistic idea of what you've achieved in the past, and then how much training you're able to put in from now until race day.
Yeah, and then there was a question about possibly training twice a day, twice in a day. When we were talking about the number of days you should be running at a minimum 4 to 5. What about people that have time, or maybe Traci on the upper end of their volume is working twice a day something that you would recommend? I don't know if we want to take that, Traci.
Well, so that's a tricky one, because that's not something I would typically recommend unless you have a really good base to begin with, to put in 2 workouts in one day. So if you're starting off with a good base and you're working towards becoming, let's say, better at the distance of 18 miles, then you might start with a 2-day workout where your total volume in that day is 18 miles, but you haven't put it all into one run. And some plans and some coaches do coach their runners through in that way, by putting them on a 2-day plan before they put them with that kind of volume in one running workout. But that's very specific to the level of the runner and whether or not they'd be ready for that.
Yeah, and I would think that if you're not running upwards of 70 to 80 miles a week at that level, you can get most everything done in once a day. But I will say this kind of opens up the door to, and I don't want to spend too much time on cross training. There are other things you can do. Go for a walk in the afternoon, go for a swim. If you just want to kind of flush your system out, or feel like you're kind of, needing some other activity, that's a good way to kind of bring some of that stuff in and not feeling like you're constantly kind of pounding miles, because you do risk possibly getting injured. And I do think you can get a lot done in single runs, but it's a good question, but it also opens the door to potentially some cross training that you can pepper in to your training plan. I've got one other question. I know we've kind of hit most of the big ones that have kind of been in the chat, but how about adjustments to the training program as you go? Let's say you get hurt, you've got a little injury you're kind of working through, or life happens, you miss a run, or you miss a long run, or you miss a workout. What's the best way to kind of make those adjustments on the fly?
Yeah, I can start off with that and then maybe hand it off to you, Bree. I know you've had some athletes recently who've dealt with that. I think the most important thing is to really make smart decisions, right? So I think we're all guilty of this, feeling like we have to be perfect, right? So you get hurt, or you start to feel maybe an ache or a pain that you feel like is maybe the early onset of an injury, but you're really worried about falling behind in your plan. At that point, the smart decision is to deal with the issue at hand early, take care of it, put it behind you, and then move on, right? And not feeling like you are, that your whole race will be jeopardized if you don't push through the pain, right? So, everything can be adjusted, and within reason, of course, but in most cases, if you're smart about it, if you're listening to your body, you're taking care of the onset of, those types of aches or pains, or if you have an interruption because of life circumstances, as long as you're proactive about it, for the most part, you can adjust. It may require an adjustment of your goal, but generally would not require a complete abandonment of your marathon training. This is really where it's important to work with a coach, though. They can really help you make some of those decisions. Bree, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just to add on, I think it is very important to be very mindful of how we're feeling day to day. Injury prevention is key, right? Nobody wants to go out there and start feeling a lot of aches and pains come on, but it's very common that we've all experienced them. So kind of recognizing those things and getting some, immediate attention, whether it's the hips are tight, we're starting to get shin splints, kind of those most common injuries that we see. We definitely want to, hit those in the beginning so that they don't prolong, our future goals, like Sean was saying. This kind of goes back to Dan put a question in the chat, and he said, how does strength training core exercises factor into this? Extremely important question, and really great to recognize that you can do 2 workouts in a day, but I would, right, kind of how Traci was saying, is we don't necessarily want those to be 2 running workouts. So you could do practice like active recovery, whether that's kind of doing your easy run. Let's say you do like a 3-mile run in the morning, and then your second workout for the day is kind of like a light yoga, maybe strength training, which is very crucial to build our overall strength and building that running economy that Terry was referring to earlier as well. Traci, I'm sorry, was referring to earlier. Our core is essential to build, especially for considering what we're going to be doing during speed workouts and using, all of our benefits of our running form there, which is core engagement, standing tall, shoulders, arm swing. So strength training is very important. And usually for our trainees, we have them doing core after their long runs, which is usually like 10 or 15 minutes as well.
Great, thank you. And just piggybacking on that too, like especially as strength training gets into, I will say, so much running work is required to get ready for a marathon. Some of these strength and core, it's about what Briana is talking about, really kind of supporting from an injury prevention standpoint. We don't want you doing really heavy, a lot of big workouts. Really, so much of your work has to be focused on the running side of things. Those things should just be there to support rather than to kind of like augment and look at them as ways to get better. So this is not the time to add in huge like cross training workout or CrossFit workouts or those types of things. If you're doing those things already, it might be time to roll some of those backs as your running increases, because you only just have so much, your body only has so much bandwidth in terms of, and we're trying to get highly specific and do something really, really specific, which is run 26 miles in one plane for in one time. So I think Bree touched on that perfectly, that it's about injury prevention and not so much about like strength building. I think that the question about 2 a days, I think it's actually important to kind of bring that back. He mentioned that it wasn't about trying to run twice a day. It was that he was struggling with having the time to get it all in and maybe having to break it up. And maybe this kind of gets to this philosophical things about making adjustments to the plan and how to do that on your own and figuring out how to work things around your current feeling. The best philosophy I can give to all of this, I feel like is that, when you're engaging in marathon training, it's kind of like putting together a puzzle, and ultimately all of the pieces, come together and they matter. There's no one piece that's more important than the other. If you miss, a key long run, it's not like, oh, I got to try to figure out a way to make that up. Ultimately, what you're trying to do is just lay as many pieces down as you can over 18 weeks. We talk about consistency, progression, adaptation, and ultimately it doesn't matter. You're just trying to see what the picture looks like in the puzzle. If it's a picture of the Golden Gate Bridge, at the end of it, you want to make sure you lay down enough pieces that you can see the Golden Gate Bridge. If you haven't laid enough of those down, because you just haven't really been consistent with your training at all, you're not going to see the Golden Gate Bridge. You're not going to be prepared on race day. But it doesn't matter whether you have every single little piece laid down, that random cloud up in the corner. You know, I know those of us that are type A, we want the puzzle to be 100% done, but ultimately it's about seeing the picture. And so as you guys make those adjustments, do what you need to do and ultimately keep that general philosophy of the goal is to get 18 weeks of consistent running in, and just trying to lay down as many of those pieces as possible and not fret the details of trying to get down, you know, break everything up and make it, well, it said 10 miles. I don't have time for that. So I'm going to do 6 and 4. Ultimately get in what you can get in and then move on and lay down another piece the next day. That's just kind of my philosophy as it relates to this. There's a question, and Sean, this might be good for you to answer, about where to add in a half marathon race during training. Where does that fit in for a taper? I know you guys build in a half marathon and also a longer run, a longer race into your training plan. Where do plopping in races fit?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Races are actually a very useful training tool, but it's important to approach them with intention and with kind of a big picture perspective, right? So for us, we would incorporate a half marathon probably earlier in your training cycle, you know, knowing that it's 13.1 miles. And if, you know, you're going out there, you're going to race the half marathon at half marathon intensity, you probably want that earlier in your training cycle because that will require some recovery, right? If you're just going out there to run the half marathon just to get miles in, you could probably do that closer to race day. And then that would probably also require you to add on some miles before and after to kind of keep up with that progressive addition of distance and duration. But races are actually a great idea because you can practice your routines related to marathon running, right? So your wake up time, your pre-race meal, your fueling and hydration plans, your warm-up plans, your pacing strategies, your mental game. So how you're thinking about your running and how you're monitoring your effort during the race. There are a lot of those type of routine and skill-based things that you can only practice in a race environment. So I think it's very useful. Just consider the big picture and, you know, approach those races with, you know, a specific goal in mind. Don't just race them to race them.
And I want to thank our panel for the great work that you guys did. It's a lot of great information on here. Thank you to everybody that joined us.